Okay, speaking of which, everyone got their notebooks ready. So this weekend's homework was a hard one, right? The principles of motion graphics. I've been watching some of them come in on Slack, and they look good. I'll go through hopefully soon this week. I'll ask almost everyone usually to resubmit that one, because it does take a couple passes to really dial in the motion and learning how the keyframes really communicate weight and gravity and squash and stretch. It'll take a little bit of work. So be prepared to revisit that one. It usually takes a couple tries to get that one dialed in. But that one's really important, right? Those are pretty fundamental issues there. Not just about creating those specific scenes. I think I'm going to add a project this semester, maybe next week, where I want you to create your own scene using those principles, right? So not just applying them in the specific scenes that I walk through with everybody, but taking them and applying them to something else. Sound good? Okay. And that one is pretty heavy. It's like, pretty heavy, getting in there with the keyframes, really dialing in your understanding of how the graph relates to what's going on with the motion. How'd you guys feel about working on that one? I'll take your silence as unbelievable excitement, right? Is that how I should interpret that? Okay. Okay, so more silence, more unbelievable excitement. Yes? Okay. All right, I think the stream is going. And I'm on my laptop today because they still don't have Cinema 4D on these machines. Also, just to put this on the stream, when you're recording, you guys are all here in person, so this is more for the online folk. When you record stuff using OBS, you don't need to have OBS. Once you hit start recording, you can just minimize OBS and go about your business, right? When you keep it on the screen, you get this is visual feedback, right? You're recording the screen is in the recording, that's on the screen, in the recording, that's on the screen, and you see what's going on here, right? As it goes down the rabbit hole there. Right? And so this is usually distracting, and you don't want it to just minimize it. And it's still doing its thing. It's just right there. In fact, you can tell. Nope, you can't tell. Well, sometimes you can tell. Down here, because I'm not recording. I'm only streaming right now. I'll go ahead and hit the record button. So here, if I say also record, nope. Okay. Sometimes there's a little red button. Here, I'll make it. Right there. It says you're recording, okay? It usually does that. I don't know why it's not doing it right now. And so all of you guys at home who are recording your questions, keep that in mind. Sound good? Okay, so let's change gears. This week, like I said, we're going to revisit that After Effects 1 once I get a chance to look at everybody's stuff. But we'll switch gears here to Cinema 4D to sort of get our feet wet doing some more of that. And so everybody has, I switched to my laptop because I have Cinema 4D. What version of Cinema 4D are we using? 24. Write that one down. Remember that, right? So that's the one you have on your home computer. There's some new things in 24 that we'll talk about here in a second. But let's talk about what we're going to be working on this week. And so this is a really fun, super fun project called Cinema 4D Party, where I set up a scene here that we can use as a starting point just to experiment with some of the different things that Cinema does, right? So there's a lot of legwork here to get things going in this program. And here I've sort of set some things up so that you have a toy box and there's some stuff in the box, right, to start off, versus making everything from nothing. And we can make some changes to it. This project, like a lot of the other projects, I've given you the starting point. So download this as your starting point and start from this file. Don't start from blank. I've got my further walkthrough here, and let's open up this file and check it out. And wait for it. My laptop's earning its money today. It's, you know, doing the streaming plus everything else. I gotta close After Effects, I think. Just too many things. So see this down here, all this junk going at the same time? Don't do this, right? So I do this far too often. We talked about this morning with a few classes, right? The more stuff you have open, in general, the less resources each thing has, right? So you don't need to be crazy about this, but especially for a lot of you guys, like the amount of resources that you're asking your computer to work with when you're running Cinema 4D is much greater than before, and so not having other things tied up, especially After Effects, which is notoriously bad as far as taking up resources and space. Do that. Cool. All right. Here we go, Cinema 4D Party. So here's what you'll see when you open this up. And let's look at something super fun. Let's look at the file browser first, just to talk for a second. And we haven't really talked about this. And so this is a Cinema 4D file, obviously, right? So when we save this, a .c4d file, right? But as we talked about before, we can't really drag this directly into After Effects, right? Because it's really just for Cinema 4D. And in After Effects, we've brought in external pictures, right, to use in our program, like in the first week, the bouncing ball. And in order to make sure we saved it all together, what was the command we had to use? Anybody remember? We had to bring it all in. Before, no, the media coder was part of the rendering process. But when we saved our whole first week bouncing ball project, we had to do a specific kind of saving. We had to collect files. Remember that? Where we scrolled down and we said dependencies, collect files. Because you have the stuff, you have the file, and then you have external assets. And so here in Cinema 4D, right here, these are the external assets, right? Instead of in After Effects, this folder right here, right there, in AE, that folder is labeled footage, right? In C4D, that folder is labeled text. Anybody want to guess what that's short for? Texture. Because most of the time our external things are going to be textures that we use to wrap around a 3D mesh. We take a picture and we wrap it around the thing. Remember we did this with our antenna scene? We had the picture that we wrapped around the entire scene. And so if we look in here, that's why I gave you a zip file. There's a bunch of stuff in here. Here's a texture for the moon. Here's a texture for the United Nations flag. Here's a globe, some wood, some other stuff, right? These are all 2D images. They're just image files that are being referenced or wrapped around some sort of 3D mesh of some kind. And my bigger point here is that these two things right here right here, they need to stay together. Just like once you do this in After Effects, your footage folder needs to stay with your After Effects file. Same thing here. If you move these or copy them to a different folder, it all has to come together. You can't just copy this file. You need to bring along this one here as well, the text folder. Because let's look here. And so I did a bunch. Up until now, when we've been working in Cinema 4D, it was totally gray to start off. And I've turned on all of the fancy bells and whistles here so that it looks like something while you're working, which is a way better, more fun way to work, in that you can see all the stuff that's going on. Down here, let's review this once. All these things down here are what? What are all of these down here? Materials. A texture is going to go on a material, right? So the material is the overarching thing. On a material, you can put a texture, or you could put a shader, right? Both of those are options. But the material is the sort of overarching organizational thing. And then over here, these are all the objects, right? Things that are in our scene. And so in order to give objects, color, you need to put a material on them. In addition to that, all of these things over here, right? So these are all the objects right here. And then all this stuff right here, these are all tags, right? So tags extend the functionality of objects in some way, right? You like giving them power-ups or extra stuff. And so one of the types of tags here is a material tag, right? So you can see those here, 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 here. But then there's these other tags. This is a UV tag. This is a selection tag. We'll get to all of this stuff. But the different tags represent different things. And so the tags extend the functionality of objects in some way. Make sense? Okay. And down here, this is the attributes window. Two T's, right? Is that right? Yeah, attributes window. And so this is our options for the current object. So what we have selected will change what is available in here. Back in the object menu up here, when you open this up, I believe it'll look like this. And so things are folded up. Every time you see something like this plus, this means you can unfold. Right, so I organized everything into two big groups. One for the stuff in the scene, which is just the objects, and the other one for the general studio environment. And so that's the back. Let's see what it is exactly. I'm going to go ahead and unfold it. And so in here, you've got your lights, the backdrop, a light target, things like this. In general, in this project, you don't need to mess with any of these objects. We're going to leave the studio as is, right? It's going to sort of make our objects look good. And so that's why I've grouped these things and separated them out. This one we can leave as is, and most of our work is going to be in the other menu, with the objects menu. So let's fold that one up and unfold over here. And if we unfold, we've got a bunch of different objects, all of which represent, different things in our scene. And at the very top, we've got one object that we want to pay attention to, our camera. And let me call your attention to this right here. And so this is really important. This is, am I looking through the camera? Right now, when it's white, yes, I am looking through the camera. So it's really important to keep track of this, whether I'm looking through the camera or not. You can click this to stop looking through the camera, and you see that it will move. If I turn it back off, there we go. It's actually animating back and forth, but it's a little choppy right now. Watch what happens. I'm going to go into this view here, and here's the top. And the green object right here, this is the camera. And so if I come over here and start to move around, watch what happens to the camera. The camera moved, right? I moved my view over here, and then the camera moved. Because I am currently looking through the camera. So that means that this view here, the perspective view, is what the camera is seeing. And so if I move this, it moves the camera. This is good for when you're setting up a camera, right? So that you can put it where you want to view the scene, right? But there'll be a whole bunch of time where you don't want to be messing up the camera. You just want to be building and adjusting your scene. And so during most of your work, you're going to want this right here to be off while working, so that the camera stays where it is and you can work on your scene. So for instance, I'll go ahead and uncheck that. And now if I come in here and move around, I can look around, I can adjust my objects, and the camera stays put. Make sense? One way to further address this situation, right? In the real world, if we shoot something, in a photography shoot of some kind, we usually put the camera on a tripod, right? And here, the equivalent of that will be a tag. And so tripod equals protection tag. How do I put that on there? Anybody remember what the only shortcut is you need to remember in Cinema 4D? If you need to find something?
Shift-C.
That's right. Right. So Shift-C is awesome. It allows you to search for anything. And so for instance, okay, I don't remember where it is, but I remember Casey saying something about protection tag. Protection, of course you need to spell things correctly. So in my case, that ends up being not so great. Ugh, tell me they changed the name of this. There it is. Why is it not coming up? Okay, I must have spelled something wrong. Right here. Protection. Protection tag. You can just double click, Shift C, double click. There we go. And so now this, the don't symbol is on the camera. This means that you can now prevent you from, bumping or moving the camera. So am I looking through the camera right now? No, right, because the little crosshair is not lit up. So I'm not looking through it. So I can move around, do my thing, fine. If I go back and look through the camera again, there we go. And now I try to move around. Doesn't work. Alt plus all of my navigation buttons, I can't move around. And so this prevents me from messing up my view. So this is something I would do right away, is add the protection tag to camera, so that you don't bump the camera, and when it comes time to render, you're all good. Any questions about that? Great. Let's look at some more of our objects. Let's look at the balloon, for instance. So here's the balloon. Which one is this? This, I click balloon, and this is the blue one. The other one is, or no, that's the ball. So there's only one balloon. These two dots right here. These are for visibility. And so the top one is the viewport, and the bottom one is the render. You guys understand this about Cinema 4D now. It's a little bit different from After Effects in that in After Effects, whatever you're seeing is pretty much what you're going to get. And in Cinema 4D, there's this separation between like what you see while you're working and what you see when you actually output stuff. And this allows you to adjust either one. And so when they're gray, everything is on. If I click them and turn it to red, watch the balloon. Balloon goes away, right? Because now we're not showing it, but only the top one is red. And so if I were to hit Control R for render, and it starts rendering this scene, which will be kind of slow, but we're actually not going to render this one. We're just going to sort of record the viewport, which will be much, much, much faster. You'll see that what's missing? The balloon, right? Or hold on a second. When it gets to there, oh, it's not missing, right? Because the bottom one is still gray, meaning that this configuration here would mean hide in viewport, but show in render. If I did the opposite, I'll turn that one gray and turn this one red, and I just render just this part right here so we can see what happens with the balloon. The balloon is not there because this particular configuration right here is hide or show in viewport, hide in render. Everybody got it? All right, so when you turn those red, you're hiding it. The top one is in the viewport, the bottom one is in the render. For right now, this whole project that we're working on right now is going to be viewport based. We're going to try and skip that render step so that it doesn't take you forever to output your homework. Because you can see this looks pretty good, right? It looks a lot better than just a bunch of gray blocks, right? And so this is an option. You can have Cinema 4D just look pretty good by default and use that as your output, and it'll be much, much faster than having to do a dedicated render. Because look at all the stuff we have going on here. On the floor, we've got reflections, we've got shadows, some of the objects are reflecting each other. It's all pretty good. Any questions on that? Let's look at some of the other objects, right? So I want to do some things to this balloon. First of all, before I do anything, I need to save my own version of this. So I'm going to go to File, Save Project As, and make sure it's still in the folder with the text. I'm just going to add my name to the end so that if I need to get back to the original, I can. Now let's look at this. What are the shortcuts for move, rotate, and scale? You can use your notes. ERT. E for move. R for rotate. And T for scale. Right? Why not S for scale? Because these are right next to each other on the keyboard. So you can just put your hand right in that position, and they're right next to each other right there. I don't even really think about which one I'm pressing, just I have the muscle memory of which key is which. And which tool am I in right now based on these arrows? That's move. If I hit R, that's rotate. If I hit T, that's scale, for scaling the object. Cool, so if I wanted to make this look like it was floating away, I could go ahead and hit R, and again, you want to only manipulate an object in one dimension. So, what does that mean? Here, I want to make this balloon kind of look like it's floating away, so I want it to face upwards first, and so I need to rotate it. So I'm going to mouse over the red, not just anywhere, just so that only the red one lights up. Then when I click and drag, I'll only be rotating on that one axis. This makes it much easier to control the manipulation. And now I'm going to need to move it, so I'm going to hit E. There we go. I want to move it sort of along the floor, and so I will first highlight the red and move it back, and then highlight the green and move it up. So it's rotating kind of this way. And then maybe let's make a second balloon. So I'm going to control drag over and maybe make this one a little bit bigger. Hit T, scale it up. E, move it up a little bit. There we go. Make sense so far? So a lot of what we're doing in this project, using those E, R, and T to adjust, move some of the objects around, learn about some of the other things you can do in Cinema. So we got our balloon right there. Let's make one more balloon. Maybe scale this one even larger. There we go. Okay, I get really lost. Ah, where am I? What's the key that can help restore my view? H. This is super handy because, like I said, you get lost. You're not sure if you zoomed way out or you zoomed too far in. And so you can select something and press H to get back to where you need to. And so, for instance, here, I'm going to select the balloon and hit H. And that one I think may be too big. Let's get the name. And we've got this. Let's look here. Great. Let's look at the assignment a little bit. And so I go through changing a bunch of things here. What do I have you make? A golden egg, second bouncing ball, add a moon to the earth, duplicate some things. We did that. Check. Change the type, change the balloon material, experiment with some of the other materials. Let's do some of the balloon stuff. And so down here, we've got our materials. And let's go to our balloon, right? So I've got this balloon. I made 3 balloons. I got this balloon, and then these are the 2 that happened when I control drag. I'm going to go ahead and move these balloons up so that they're next to this. So this is a little bit tricky, but you want to be precise about it. I could drag this one up and end up with this. Right now, this balloon is a child of the other balloon. We don't want this necessarily. These balloons are separate. We want to keep them on the same level. How do you keep this from happening? When you're dragging the object, I can't zoom in when I'm doing this. If I go right here, see how the arrow is pointed to the left? Is it the left? Yeah, the left. That means it's going to go to the same level. If I drag the arrow over top of something and it points down, that means it's going to make the object a child of the object that's currently over. And so to make it appear, we want them all to be at the same level, just like so. And so those are all together there. Make sense? So you need to be able to do both. Sometimes you want an object to be appear, sometimes you want the object to be a child of another object. Let's manipulate the color of these things. And so this is the material tag for the balloon. And if you double click on it, it gives you all the options for, let's see, do I double click here? Yeah. It gives you all the options down here, and it also highlights the material over here, which one we're talking about. And so if you double click on that one, it's the same options that are down here, except they're in a bigger window, which makes it a little bit easier. And over here, this is where most of the action happens for materials. And so all of the whole window that we're looking at right now is the material. All of this stuff right here, these are channels. They're different aspects of the way something looks. Color, reflection, bump, right? They're different properties of how something appears, a different channel. And you see that some of them are checked and some of them are not. When they're checked, that means that it's on, right? And it's not checked, it's off, that's obvious. But you need to opt in to the different things that you want to use. And so to make it simpler, you don't want to need something that's reflective when you don't really need it to look that way. Anyways, we're just going to go here. Most of the time, we're going to make an adjustment here in the color channel. And so I could change this to some other color. And you'll see that the color of the balloon will slightly change. And now my balloons are a different color. Why are they all a different color? Because it was the same material applied to all 3 balloons. So this is a little bit different than After Effects 2, in that each object has its own color in After Effects by default. Here, when you apply material to something, it's that material applies to all those objects. What if I want this balloon to be blue? This material down here, we could make another one. Same rules. I could control drag the material. Now I get a duplicate. This is balloon 1. And this one here, I'm going to go ahead and change it back to, double click on it, change it back to blue. And then I can apply it to one of my balloons by just dragging it onto that balloon and letting go. Now that balloon is blue. Make sense? And if you look, it has the tag right here. It actually has both tags, but these evaluate in this direction here. So this is the top over here, and over here, this is the bottom. And so the ones on the right cover up the ones on the left. Right now, it's not necessarily transparent, so we just see the one on the right. I could just delete this one, and it would look the same. So some big picture here, right? I use the E, R, and T to move the balloons around, put them where I want, trying to do one dimension at a time. Control drag to make multiple balloons, and then just control drag to make more materials and change the materials. It'd be good now to keep this organized. And so here's another really great shortcut. Alt-G will take multiple things and group them together. And so I'm going to do that with my balloons. I'm going to shift click all the balloons, press Alt-G, and now they're in a null. But if I unfold the null, there are all my balloons right there underneath. So it's kind of like layers, but not exactly. I'm going to relabel this balloons. That way I know what it is. It's just like we said, it's important to label your comps in After Effects so that you don't have a whole bunch of things called Comp 1, Comp 2, Comp 3. In Cinema 4D, the equivalent of that is not having a bunch of things named null, null 1, null 2. You want to label them so that you know what's what. Make sense? Okay, why don't you guys give that a shot. Download the zip file, open it up in Cinema, and just stick to the balloons for now. Also, before you do this, make sure you do your housekeeping and put what tag on the camera. Protection. Let me check in with the chat. explained it terribly wrong.
Wow. Okay. Ouch.
No, she did something like Caitlin, we just something with Caitlin, and so, here, open it again. What you just did. You just pick that. Yeah, no, the same file. Open it up. Okay, so actually you were wrong. So you just double click on it. Open it up. This is really a Windows problem. One of the things I don't know is just okay, so when this happens, all this stuff is black, right? This doesn't, like, what happens? This doesn't look like what happened before. This black is Cinema 4D's way of telling you that it's missing textures, right? All those textures that I showed you before, those images that were wrapped around the geometry, when it can't find an image to wrap around, it's just black. It's like, I can't find these pixels, I don't know where it is. And so the problem here, and it's not Jelly's fault at all, it's
You said it was.
no, let's blame Bill Gates, right? There's someone who can accept some blame, right? He's doing all right, and we'll blame it on him directly, even though he has nothing. No, he's not dead. Even though he has nothing to do with Windows anymore. I don't know. It's like chairman. So the texture is missing, but the problem here, close it up, is a Windows problem. And so when you're Windows shows you the file, right? And it's perfectly reasonable to be like, yes, we can send file because it's right there. But see how it says extract all right there?
I actually already extracted it, but still did the same thing.
Okay, well, let's test because that fixes her problem here. So hold on, you need to extract both things, the text and the file. So shift click so you get both. Right? So whenever it says extract all, that means you haven't unzipped the file, right? It still needs to be extracted. And so now let's extract. And extract it to that folder. It says place. Okay, now open that folder. Now click on that one. And this is right. It just fixed Caitlin's. Yep, that's fine. It just says I created this with the. Yep, that's fine. Okay, cross your fingers. This is the old version. We worked on Caitlin's. It just Caitlin didn't just work. It just worked. Right. So this is the old one. Like I said, in a week we're not gonna have this problem because so yeah, you just do the same thing. So fix it by hand. Click. Well, what's still missing here? No, we're good. It's just, yeah, because we've got the textures back, right? We have the actual images, right? The flag, the globe, those aren't black anymore. And the little person, who was wood, that was black before, and that's good. The black here and here, this is just the way the rendering was in the older version. So you can't really don't worry about that here. Once you get it on your home machine, right? Because you have it on your home machine, right? It'll work fine. So it's just the older version. But we fixed the texture because this is good. So I was right all the time.
Well, I mean, it was like that the first time.
That's the moral of the story. That's what we should take away.
It was like that the first time when I first extracted it, and then you came by, told me to close it, and then called me out in front of everyone. Did that.
I'm just so, but everybody, so black usually means like can't find texture. So that's usually the issue. And 90% of the time, it's that extract problem. It's like you think you unzipped it. Like if you unzip the C4D file, you miss the textures, right? That's why I made that point at the beginning. You need to keep those two things together, the C4D file and the texture folder, so that you can find all the other stuff. Everybody make sense? Okay. And so I wish, yeah, that that Windows made a better deal of like whether this file was extracted or not. But yeah, these here. You're fine. You messing around. Like the balloon looks okay, so go ahead and mess with those balloons, right? The other ones are going to be fine. We're you want to stay after class for several hours while I explain what I've had to go through to try and get these computers updated, I'd be happy to bore you to death with this information. But if I could simply log onto the computer and install this software, I would have done that weeks ago. But that is not my job. And not as in not my job, they won't let me do that job. So yeah, it's can be irritating. You think it would be easy to install a bunch of software, but oh my gosh, it is not. Yeah, allowed me to show off some fun we had this morning where we made donuts and then we made a donut explosion. Super fun. So this is, the donut was made in Cinema 4D and then this is Unity. So it's rendering it in real time. Right, so your job is to make more balloons and change the color of said balloons. And then also not mess up your camera in the process. Also, resave your file under your name. I mean, it's not the end of the world if you don't, because you can always just download the original again. Okay, cool. Raise your hand if you got a different colored balloon somewhere else in your scene. Yeah, yeah. There's an extra computer, you guys know that one. Like you don't have enough to do. Okay, one other thing here. I got a request. So everybody come over here, over on this side. So, along the topic of Cinema 4D, yeah, everybody, get up. This weekend. Okay. So something I made in Cinema 4D, different application of it is, so this is augmented reality. And so what this is, get a little bit closer. You can pass the phone around and sort of look, right? It's there. It'll stick pretty good. And so there's a grid of, so my partner Jen is also an artist, and occasionally we work together. And so she has a project that's opening on Friday at the Walter Art Gallery in, I think that's in Scottsdale. It's like Thomas and 52nd Street or something. And you can walk a little bit closer. Walk a little bit closer, you can see the grid of stuff that's in the middle, the block there. If you get closer, you can see they're sort of individual paper suitcases, like little suitcases. And so this is a project she did about COVID. There's 19,000 of them in that block, and one for each of the people that's died in Arizona. Did it go away? Let's restart. And so there's the art that's in the space. I'll pull up some pictures of that in a second. But then, in addition to that, there's, for the people who can't come to the space, there's this augmented reality version of it that exists. You can load up from anywhere. So this will come into your space here. It takes a second for it to load up. So I'm doing this. The app that sort of displays it all is an app called Hoverlay. It's like overlay with an H. Like hover. There it is. So you can sort of see all of them. And then she's made some additional sort of pop-up art, and that's what shows in a second here. Yeah, right over top. So that's like an animated video that shows over top. But that was all, like designed in Cinema 4D and exported into a different format and then loaded into the app. Right? So a totally different application of this stuff. Right? So like 3D mesh, and then this comes through all that. And so totally different. I'll send everybody a link to that. All you have to have is the Hoverlay app is free. If you put that on your iPhone or Android, then you just click a link to that channel, and then it shows you, projects it into whatever space that you're currently in. So I think we might do something with that later on this semester. Anybody, so it's a free way to sort of access the whole thing. Cool. All right. Let's keep going here. Let me just let me just take one picture of this. Great. Okay, grab your notes. Let's look at a couple more things here on this. So, for instance, change the type or make the person, the figure, stand on one leg. So those are both multi-part things where we can look at them. Let's check those out. So back over here, let's look at the type first. Where it says party, if we select that object, selecting the objects, just a word of that, in this case it worked. I was able to click on the R, and you see that it selected the thing over here that says MoText. That's fine. That doesn't always work. For instance, I selected the clock, and if you unfold over here, I actually didn't select the entire clock. It just selected the glass part of the clock, because the clock is a multi-part, more complicated thing. So you'll have better luck if you need to address the entire object, selecting it over here in the object menu versus clicking on it over in the direct view, especially for multi-part, complicated things. So let's look at party. I'll go over to MoText, and here, there's the different tabs, and the object tab is usually the one that's going to be where all of the options that you want to deal with are. Right? This is like the major parts of the object. And so, for instance, here I can put in some alternative text. If I could type. There we go. You can dial up a new font. Usually in 3D type, a thicker font is going to look a lot better. So there we go. And what if I wanted to change the color of this? How would I go about doing that? Okay, how do I know which material is on this?
Oh, tag.
That's right, exactly. If I select the tag, it'll select it over here. And so I could change color of this material, something else. Right, and it turns out that was on the egg as well. So let's say I want to keep the egg the same color. I could just control drag this material and make it some other color, and then apply that just to the type. Oops, didn't get the type, got the background. Again, let's drag it up here. That's better. Could adjust where the hat is a little bit. And so this lets us talk a little bit about positioning. So when I select the hat over here, you see that the party hat is a child of the text. So I'm just going to select the party hat. You see that I get the axis, and the axis points in the direction of the hat. Right? The Y, you see, is kind of off at an angle because the hat is off at an angle. This is object space. Let's say I wanted to keep the hat tilted, but move it straight up, like directly up, world up. In that case, moving it straight up is what's referred to as world space. This goes for any program. This is not Cinema 4D specific. Unity, every program works like this. You have the space that's relative to the object, and you have the space that's expressed in terms of the world. So here, how do I switch back and forth between these two things? This button right here. And so this is the sign for object space. And this is a toggle. Right now we're in object space. I'm going to press it. This is, as you may have guessed, I think it's a pretty good icon. This is world space. And so now you see how the axis points straight up, right? So now I would be able to easily keep it at an angle, but move it to where I would want it relative to the type, but keeping the angle. And so this toggle doesn't change anything about the object. It just changes the way that you interact with the object. Sometimes it makes sense to put it in world space and position things that way. Other times it makes sense to put it into object space and do it that way. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. And we adjusted the type, right? Because most of the time, like I said, we're going to come in here to the object menu, the object tab, and that allows us to make those changes. So let's look at the figure over here. And so there's actually animation here, which we'll get to in a second. If I hit play, it's playing a little bit slowly because I'm asking my computer to do a lot, right? I'm streaming right now and doing this, so it runs a little slow. Let's go ahead and stop that. And select our figure and come over here to figure. You see that there's a plus. And let's unfold the figure. And if I unfold, right here under pelvis, and you'll see that there's even more parts. Let's keep unfolding. And so this is the entire layout of that character. And so this allows us to sort of reposition said character. Let's say we wanted to stand on one leg. And so let's go to pelvis. Let's say we'll raise the left. So I'm going to come over here to left thigh and grab this. And the thing is, for characters, coherent parts that need to stay together, right? You don't want to detach the character's arm in this case, is that almost all of the manipulation you'll be doing will be rotation, not position. That's how your joints work. They're not moving. Your bones are rotating around different axes that are created by the different joints. So for instance, left thigh, R for rotation. Bring that up. Let's come down to, there we go, shin. If I follow the hierarchy down, rotate that down. And then maybe the foot, point the toe a little bit. And so I'm able to stand on one leg now and raise the other leg. Now, let's look at this. If I hit play, the character is doing two things. Again, it's playing back pretty slowly right now. It's waving its hand, and its head is looking at this floating platonic. And so this, it's important to realize that this here the left lower arm, when I click on that, you notice that this parameter has a red dot. What does this mean? It's not waiting for input. It's already had input, meaning that it has a what? It has a keyframe for animation, right? It's moving. Anytime you have a red, that this is turned red here, that means that you have set keyframes for this parameter. And so that's making the hand wave back and forth. So even if you change the position of this value here, once it starts playing, it will go back to whatever has been keyframed. So it's important. After Effects works that same way too. You can move something, but if that thing has keyframes, it'll snap back to wherever the keyframes told it to be. But the other objects that are not keyframed are fair game. So for instance, let's say we want to raise the other arm. And so let's dial down here to right upper arm, hit R, and raise that one. Is this a yoga pose? Right? This is kind of like a modified tree where you stand on one leg and then wave and your arm goes all over the place. Like so. There we go. And let's say I wanted the figure to not look like wood, but look like a metal. There's a bunch of metal materials down here. I could choose one of these. Let's try this metal. And in this case, if I drag it up here, it's just, this is that selection problem again, where if I want to make sure the whole character is metal, I'd be better off dragging it over here to the top of the hierarchy. Because when you put a material on the top, if there's no materials below it, it will apply to everything below it in the hierarchy. So in this instance, there we go. Now the character is totally metal. Cool. Okay, go ahead and make sure you're saving where you're at. Go ahead and try and manipulate your character a little bit, and also change the type and move the hat a little bit. 3D type, generally the same as 2D. Try to stick to the fonts from the whitelist. Yeah. So there's not that much difference with the viewport setup like it is. The thing you're going to get in the render, you're not going to get in the viewport is the ray tracing reflection. You can see how it's reflecting the stuff. The reflections you get in real time are the fake reflections. So when we render the product, we'll just render out the viewport so that everyone's able to see the stuff. Also, when you hit Control R on the screen for this thing, you're actually rendering out all of these pixels, which is way more than HD, right? Because this is a 4K monitor. Everybody saving? Okay, go ahead and save. Let's talk about a few more things. That go okay? Trying to manipulate the character? Grabbing it and rotating? Cool. Let's look at some of the other. Let's look at this tube back here. This is an important one. Okay, so grab your pencils right here. So this tube in the back, this is this object right here, and this is a sweep. And so you're using 2D splines or lines to generate 3D geometry. And we can see the details of that if we unfold the tube. There's two things. There's this inside, which is kind of like a circle or a hexagon, and then there's this path right here. And so essentially this is being drug along this. So look what happens when I get this out of here. In order for it to move a little bit quicker, I'm going to just put this in a separate file, where it's a little bit quicker for a second. While I'm streaming, it's pretty slow. So here it is. I'm going to hit NB to see the polygons. And I'm going to turn off this object right here. I'm going to turn that off. And now I can see one of the splines. It's just a line right there. And the other one, I can look at right here. And so this shape is essentially being swept along this shape. Right? So this right here, this end side, and so end side means you get to pick how many sides. And so you could use a end side to make a triangle, and if you keep adding sides, it'll get the whole way up to a smooth circle. And with that in mind, this circle, kind of right about here, is being swept along the other spline in order to make this piece of geometry. So for instance, if I took the end side and dialed down, again, under the Object tab, usually where I'm looking, let's say sides. I'm going to go ahead and make this 3. 3. There we go. Now, it's a triangle being swept along the other path. As I dial this up, square, pentagon, hexagon, keep adding more sides and it gets very smooth. Does that make sense for everybody? What happened right there? Good. Now, let's look at the spline, the path. If we look at that, how do I manipulate this thing? It's a path made with points. And so in order to manipulate the points, you need to be in point mode over here. And so now if I select point mode, my ERT tools will not move, scale, and rotate the object. They will move, scale, and rotate the points. And so for instance, I could grab a point. If you zoom in here, you could select a point, and then I could move. Scaling or rotating a point doesn't really do anything. In this case, it's a path, so our rotation works in that direction. And so I can come in here and move these points around. And when I do that, I turn everything back on, and it rebuilds the path, rebuilds the three-dimensional geometry based on that. And so I can come in here, turn that off, grab this, move that. Make sense? So most of the time, or pretty much all the time, in this project so far, we've had this selected because we're manipulating objects. In order to get in there and actually change the shape of this thing, we need to select this to be in point mode and edit the points of the path. And so I can move those around and change the shape of this thing. If I want to make a more complex thing, remember that control drag? It also works for rotate, which actually would work a little bit better in this case. So I could control rotate, and sort of create another one, and maybe create another one. Create some kind of tree-like thing, like so. And we could do that here. So the sweep object. The one below it is also fun. Looks like one of those kids' toys, right? Where you stack the plastic donuts. That is this object right here, the cloner. The cloner, if I unfold it, has some toruses, tori, I don't know, in here. And the cloner copies objects. So if I turn this off, it totally goes away. We don't have anything in there. If I turn it back on, you'll see that it is copying things in a line. And here's the count. So watch, so I dial this down or up. I get more or less copies of the object. And down here, these are the changes that are happening per step. So per copy, it moves up 11 centimeters on the Y, and it gets slightly smaller. The next copy is 95% as big as the previous copy. If this were to be like 105, you see that now, as I keep going, they're getting bigger. You could also parametrically start rotating them per copy. So this is where things start to get really interesting. The idea that we could take shapes like this and use this right. So parametric, another word you'll see, algorithmic, right? The idea that we're generating shapes based on a formula of some kind. Let's have them maybe get put them back that way. Maybe 80. Slightly less of them. So the cloner is doing this to these shapes here. Another one, this parameter right here, iterate, means that when it clones, it's going white, blue, pink, white, blue, pink, so on and so forth. If you change this to random, you'll see I get a random distribution of colors. You could put other objects in here, right? So for instance, what about a party hat? I'm going to control drag that into the cloner. And now, as I make more copies, I get this party hat in the mix. I don't know if that's really working artistically in this instance, but you get the idea. Yeah, I like that. That's kind of weird. If I only wanted party hats, I could turn off torus objects, just have party hats. If I remove the toruses from the cloner, there we go. There I have a stack of party hats. Now it's a party, right? You could mix in 1 torus, 2 torus, 3 tori. Maybe get an egg in the mix. Right, so that opens up a lot of possibilities here. So try those 2 objects. The sweep, manipulate the points, move that around. Remember, you got to be in point mode. And then the cloner, where you're able to manipulate things per step, add in some other things, maybe switch it to random instead of iterate. Ready? Go for it. Any questions on the stream? Is anyone on the stream right now? So Adrian, I need to see your Cinema 4D license window. You come up to Window, then you go to, Help, License Manager. Adrian on the stream, send me a screenshot of this so I can see what it says, and I can help you with your license issue. made a new project.
Oh,
Right. Just because no one's done it.
oh, so just, I'm fine to do that here, just.
Yeah. You guys can, yeah, exactly. You guys can edit your suite in the project. You don't need to make, I just did that so that I could do it very quickly. Okay, everybody save, save. Any questions about doing those manipulations? Making sense so far? Any overall questions? Awesome. Let's go ahead and talk about some more stuff. So grab your notebooks. Let's focus on the things that are animating. And so again, I'll probably copy these out to separate files so that we can see them at regular speed. But here you can see there's some animation already in the project. The globe, as you know, the world is turning as the world turns here, and then the ball is bouncing. The water is also sort of waving, and this platonic is also moving around. Let's focus on the ball first, bouncing ball. And so again, just to do this a little bit more quickly, you don't need to do this step. I'm just doing this so that it's easier to look at. One of the requirements is that you need to make another bouncing ball and make it bounce change speed. So let's look at that. I'm going to take this bouncing ball. Again, I'm not going to select here because you see that actually selects something below it. I'm going to select the top over here. I can't select. Let me say that again. You're better off selecting things over here on the right versus clicking on it here. So I'm going to grab this and just put it in a separate file. There we go. And so that's playing back at the speed that it'll actually render at. So we got a bouncing ball. That's great. Let's look at the keyframes here. I'm going to go to coordinates. And we have a child-parent relationship here. And so what is this object right here? What kind of object is this? What's that? It's the parent, but if you look at it, it's not anything. It's a null object, right? It's just a blank axis. This object here with the triangle, this is the actual geometry, right? This is the actual ball. If I turn this off, it will go away, right? You wouldn't see it. Whereas the other thing is just a blank object for the hierarchy. And so we look at all of this over here, which object is actually animated? The child or the parent?
Child.
That's right. And so this makes it easy to move around, right? If we just control drag the parent, we'll get another one, and the animation will move with it because the animation is relative to the parent. Make sense? And so we have a second one over here. Great. And anytime you're dealing with animation, once you actually start, we need to do something to the keyframes here to make it bounce at a different speed, right? And so I'm going to select one of the other bouncing balls. And we did this in the very first bouncing ball project. We went over to the animation layout. So it looks a little bit more like After Effects. Cool. And so now, if I want this ball here to bounce faster, sometimes you need a little bit more space here. If we want it to bounce faster, does there need to be more space, or do I need to drag these to the left or to the right? If we want it to bounce faster. That's right. So we need to compress the amount of space. In Cinema, we can just select, sort of drag all of them like so. That gives you this handle, and you can compress or expand. This is pretty handy. I like this a lot. And right now, you'll notice that the setting is that it's set to loop. And so after it does the very first bounce, it'll just keep looping those 3 keyframes. which is super handy. If I wanted this to bounce slower, I would not, this is sliding the whole thing. I'd grab the very end of this and move it over to expand. And then if I hit play, we get a much slower bounce over there. So duplicating the object and then adjusting the keyframes to change the timing. Make sense? Great. And so with this child-parent relationship in mind, if we come back over to the other project, right here, we need to make a what did I say? Yeah, add a moon to the Earth. And if you look here, I already gave you a moon material. So that's pretty good. We can use that to texture our moon. We need to make a new shape for the moon. What shape do you think we should use? The sphere, yeah, pretty easy. So let's come in and grab a sphere. All right, way too big. Let's go ahead and move it. I need to scale it down. What's the shortcut for scale? T, very good. There we go. Let's move it up a little bit. Maybe out. And then I can just drag the moon material onto this new sphere. And it looks like a moon. Cool. Now, we want it to rotate around the Earth. Okay, this is not astronomically correct, but we're just making it work for this thing. Let's label this moon. If you just double click, you can do that. And so let's find the Earth over here. Or I think I said globe. All right, so it's a child of the cube right here. All right, so it's like sitting on this table. And this, you'll notice, is already animated because when you watch it, the world turns. But we want the moon to come along for the ride. And we need to make the moon a child of the globe. I should really have called this just Earth. There we go. And now, let's do that. Might need a little bit more space here. So I'm going to grab the moon, drag it down, and then I'm still holding it down. I'm hovering over the Earth and waiting till the arrow points down, and then I'll let go. And now, this is the hierarchy that you want. So the metal cube is really the table. On top of that is the Earth. The Earth is animating. And so if you animate the parent, the child will come along. And so the child is going to spin with the parent. And so now let's watch what happens. So we have the moon spinning around the Earth. Since the Earth already had keyframes and we made it a child of the Earth, and now it's spinning because it's, essentially attached to the Earth. Does that make sense for everybody? So dealing with some animation there. We took the moon, made it a child of the Earth, and then we duplicated the ball and adjusted the keyframes to make it either bounce faster or bounce slower, one or the other. Sound good? What do you guys think? Is this cool? Like having this all laid out, like this big, it should feel like a playground, right? It does? A super fun playground? I'll take that as a yes. Yes.
If you wanted to add like a rotation to the moon itself, like around its own axis, would you do that in the child setting as well, or somewhere else?
That's exactly right. Right. So this is animated right now. If we want the moon to also revolve, yeah, is that the correct language? Right. This is revolution, and this is rotation,
Yeah.
astronomically. Right. Is someone taking astronomy as your science this semester? Usually someone's taking it. No? Okay, I think I have that right. I don't know, I'm not in the science department. Anyways, so here the moon, if we wanted to have the moon rotate, let's back it up. And at the very beginning, which way do we want it to rotate? Let's get to where we can see it. There we go. And so we want it to rotate. Nope, not that way. There we go, that way. And so at the beginning, I'll go ahead and set this right here, right? I have the moon selected to 0 degrees, and I'll set a keyframe. So just clicking right here, boom, keyframe. And then I'll just fast forward to the end of the animation. And if I want it to go around twice, I need to type in what number? Not atom. 2 revolutions. What would I type in for 1? What's that? 360, right? And I don't even need to do the math. I could just go 360 times 2, 720. You can do math in the fields, all kind, not just simple stuff, all sorts of stuff. And now, keyframe. And so now, over the course of it rotating, it will also revolve twice. Again, my playback is slower, but you can see it. Who's doing it? Super question. Cool? Okay, great. Give this a shot. Play around with those animation parameters. You doing that to keep it clear? Oh, okay.
I'm frozen. I just had surgery and my temperature control is a little off.
I could ask her to turn it down, but I might have someone freeze to death.
It's all me. Where's the costume behind you?
Yes. I'm going to do that one next. Does this all make Cinema 4D seem more approachable? And sort of motivate you as to why you want to deal with this program? save it, close the recording if you're also, hey, you're plugged in. Right? Okay. Yeah, try closing it, reopen it once. Yeah, so maybe having it off while you're working, right? And then when it's time to render it, turn it back on. Yes. So if something doesn't show down there, so we can yeah, there it is. If you're not seeing it, you get an H key. So that you know, like refocuses so you can see it. Okay, so if something doesn't show up here, you can drag it. There's nothing in the that's called. Drag it out. I like the cloner. That looks good. The cloner looks good. Because you are Okay, let's just cover one more thing here before we wrap it up for the day. So there's a few more changes that I require you to go through, and then I want you to have fun with this, you know, make it your own scene, have fun, play around, just get used to using some of the objects, right? The whole point of this is that I put a lot of cards on the table so you could mess around with them. You have something there to create with. How do you get it out of here? Let's talk about that. The workflow will be similar, right? We're going to render a PNG sequence, just like we did for the other project. And then that PNG sequence has to go into what? What? Not yet. After Effects. And once we put it into After Effects, we definitely want to make sure, remember, an image sequence doesn't have any information about frame rate. And so we need to say interpret footage. Remember, this whole process is at the end of the other tutorial if you need to see it again. Interpret footage, and we need to set the frame rate to what? That's right. And once we do that, then we send it to what program? Media encoder, right? And it's the command is yeah, I think it's just send comp to media encoder. And then we want to use the YouTube 1080 settings in media encoder. So if you have any questions about getting to that part of it, you can re-watch the end of the bouncing ball tutorial. That process is essentially the same. We'll use that same process in almost every project, right? Because we want to end up making an MP4 from wherever. And so almost always we're taking something, rendering it, bringing it in to After Effects, and then setting it out that way. Let's look at that real quick. So if I come up here to render settings, you'll notice that it's in viewport renderer, and so this will be great. That means that it'll render exactly what we see in the viewport, and I want to come here, and before I do that, before I render, I want to go back and look through my camera so that it recenters my view into the view I want for the camera. And then I'm going to go ahead and change this to my 1920 by 1080. Make sure this says 24 frames per second. And under Out Save, I'm going to change it to a PNG. And say where I want to save this. Always make a folder, because we're going to make a whole bunch of files. And call this Farina Party. So this is what we want this to look like. And then when I go to render, this button in the middle, this is the one that's actually going to actually render it out. So if I press that, we made a donut in the class before this. It's been donut day, I guess. You'll see that it'll take a second for it to load it up to the GPU. It'll say preparing. But once it's done preparing, it should go pretty quick. We'll see. My computer's definitely a little bit slow right now because I'm also streaming the class and everything else. You can hear my fans revving up. Computer's going to take off here. There we go. And so it has to do that initial prep. But then once that's done, you see how quickly it's spitting out frames. Boop, boop, pretty quick. So it'll chug through all 192 frames fairly quickly. And your computers should not be too much slower than that. In fact, if you're not running a bunch of other things, it should be fairly quick. Make sense? Okay. Cool. Let's call it there. So save where you are, and you can pick up there on the homework. Remember, there's the other video of me talking through this. Also, everybody understands that all of the live streams are on the YouTube channel. So if you need to go back and see anything again, you can always look it up there. On Wednesday, we'll talk about the other Cinema 4D project for Monday. So we're going to have two, because this is pretty easy. The other one, you can be a little bit more creative with. We'll look at that one. Sound good? Great. Awesome. I'll talk to everybody on Wednesday then. See you Wednesday. You too. See ya. Bye. See ya.
Have a good evening.
You too.